Kia ora, koto katoa. Ko maua o te maunga, ko te awa kairangi te awa. No tauranga moana aho, ko Davie toko whanau, ko Yvonne toko ingoa. Kia ora, good afternoon, and welcome to our Money and Relationships webinar, Why Conversations Matter. My name is Yvonne Davie and I am the Manager of Super and Savings at Craig's Investment Partners, and I'm delighted to be your facilitator for this afternoon's session, and I thank you all for joining us. I'd also like to thank our supporters for today's event, AUT, Craig's Investment Partner, EqualExes, Good Shepherd New Zealand, and YWCA. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Financial Services Council and forms part of its 3-month It Starts With Action campaign, supporting Te Ara Ahunga Ora Retirement Commission's national strategy that aims to make impactful change in growing women's financial confidence and well-being. Through engaging conversations and tangible actions, the goal is to collectively contribute to a positive shift in the confidence and well-being of wahine around the country. The campaign is into its 5th fortnight with a whole host of other activities taking place around the theme of navigating life's challenges. And during our session, we will be exploring many of the challenges we face in life when we're in a relationship. What is the impact on our financial well-being when life throws a curveball? And there are many challenges along the way. What happens when one of you loses your job or if one of you has an accident? What are the things we should be considering when discussing with our partners when we move in together or when we have kids? Or worse still, when the relationship turns sour, breaks down and ends in separation or divorce? These are all things that can have a huge impact on our financial well-being, and research tells us that women often end up with the thin end of the wedge. Today, we will discuss some of these challenges, and our panel experts will share their thoughts, research, views, and some practical tools to help us with these very important topics and themes. At Craig's, we fully support this very worthy campaign, and we're very proud of our own Women's Wealth program, which has been running since 2007, with a very dedicated and passionate group of female advisors across 16 of our branches. Our purpose is to empower New Zealand women with more knowledge and confidence to invest and ultimately achieve their own financial freedom and well-being. And that's why we're so delighted to be part of today's event. I'd now like to introduce our marvellous wahine joining me on this webinar today. Bridget Jackson is the founder of EqualExes. She is an experienced entrepreneur with many years in the public eye with women's health space. She is a settlement strategist, a CDC-certified divorce separation coach, a qualified lawyer, and has postgraduate dispute resolution qualification, and she is also a trained divorce mediator. Bridget set up EqualExes to make the world a better place by enhancing the well-being of clients who are going through divorce and separation. She has created a less costly, less time-consuming process that understands the emotional impact while still delivering fair outcomes for both men and women contemplating going through or rebuilding themselves post-separation or divorce. Nicola Eckelton is the Social Inclusion Manager at Good Shepherd New Zealand. She was introduced to economic harm when she was working at family violence agency Aviva, piloting a Good Shepherd New Zealand microfinance program to support Aviva's clients. Nicola co-wrote the 2018 research paper, Economic Abuse in New Zealand, and is currently leading Good Shepherd's work in this area. This includes the development of their Healthy Financial Relationships Toolkit, other harm resources and training, and a pilot program supporting clients to address the impact of economic harm. Dr. Ayesha Scott is an interdisciplinary researcher with an agenda that spans violence against women, empirical finance, personal finance, and financial econometrics. She is passionate about healthy financial relationships and an advocate against economic harm in intimate relationships. Ayesha joined the AUT Business School Finance Department in October 2016. She obtained her PhD in financial econometrics in July 2016 from Queensland University of Technology and has undergraduate degrees in mathematics and finance. Her research, teaching and professional interests focus on improving New Zealanders' understanding of healthy financial relationships and their personal financial fitness. And finally, Latavia Tualasia Totai is Project Manager, Young Woman, Money and Work at the YWCA Auckland. She also worked as a financial mentor at a Pacifica social service. At 24, she is passionate about making money conversations more accessible for rangatahi. She received a New Zealand Youth Award for leadership for her work serving wahine in prisons and various volunteer projects. She was recently appointed onto the Women's Health Action Board of Trustees. When Latavia was young, family violence forced her whānau into a women's refuge and they faced housing insecurity throughout their life. From being raised by a single parent on the benefit to being part of the government's welfare expert advisory group and advocating on the front line for Pacific families in poverty, Latavia feels incredibly grateful for the opportunity she has had and strives to make the spaces more equitable for young Pacifica coming through and to live her life in the service of her community. So, as you can see, we've got an absolutely fabulous lineup, and I thank you all for joining me today. So, now I'd like to hand over first to Bridget. Bridget, can you tell me what are the challenges you see, I guess, when people come to you for help when their relationship is ending, which of course is a very tumultuous time, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on the webinar today. I'm really excited to be part of it. Now, there's many, many challenges that people go through when they're facing divorce and separation. And it's really been a real insight for me. The business has been in play for about 4 years now. And 75 to 80% of the women that I see have no idea about their finances. They don't know what they own and owe. Mortgage, I don't know if I have a mortgage. I haven't managed the finances. I haven't been involved from that aspect for many years. So, they really are very unaware. Ignorance is not bliss, obviously, in this situation. So that certainly is really harmful for people who are looking at divorcing and separating, because that immediately puts you on the back foot in terms of knowing what you own and owe, and financially, you do not want to be in a position, particularly if you've been in a relationship that has been high conflict and obviously leading to divorce. The last thing you want to have to do is have to undergo disclosure through the court system because you're not able to get that information from your ex-partner. So there's many challenges, but in terms of the finances, that is something that is very, very evident these days. And there's even some men, we see men and women in our business, and there's even men who don't know what they own and owe either because their partner has been managing the finances. And there's a lot of that moves on to obviously a lot of issues moving forward for people. 5 out of 6 women, according to the New Zealand stats in about 2020, they are the ones that end up with the children, whether that's 50% or more full time. And that has a fundamental effect on women's finances moving forward. Obviously, there's issues in relation to women. Some women haven't gone back to work, haven't been in the workforce for 10, maybe 15 years or longer. And that certainly will absolutely have an effect on them moving forward in terms of being able to obtain work again. And what does that look like for them when they've been out of the workforce for such a long period of time, and being able to financially look after, obviously, themselves as a new person financially, but also their children and other family members who also may be living in that household. Another stat is that 3 out of 4 women actually don't receive their full child support payments. So that's another issue as well. And 1 in 5 women actually fall into poverty after the divorce process. So things like women going back to work, touching on that, coming back to that, there might be childcare issues, with only being able to work through kindy hours or school hours. There's issues in maybe having to move away because they need to go to another location. There may be issues in terms of having to try and potentially work outside school hours and weekends and public holidays. And with children, that can be very difficult when you don't have family support. So a single parent on a working income can be very difficult for women, but also men as well, obviously.
Thanks, Bridget. I mean, there's some quite startling stats and quite challenging, aren't they, for women? And which I think is really interesting, particularly as a number of women manage the household budget, and they're very good at doing that. But when these bigger financial impacts of, through separation or divorce, and I mean, I was quite interested to hear that, 75, 80% of women don't actually know the bigger financial picture about what they owe or, what resources they have, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real disconnect. I think when a lot of women, understandably, go into a relationship thinking that I'm going to be married for 60 years, I'm responsible for looking after the family. He or she, your partner is the main, potentially predominantly males, but obviously there are females who are the main breadwinners as well. They are the main caregivers. They haven't worked for a number of years. And, my advice is if you're going to go through divorce and separation, you have to be absolutely prepared on all levels across the legal, the financial, the parenting and the wellbeing before you leave your relationship, because, you're investing in yourself for tomorrow, not today, across all of those areas. And that's crucially important, that you get the experts around you that you need to support you through that process.
Thank you, Bridget. I guess, Nicola, I might turn to you now, and I guess at the other end is bringing up the conversations, and obviously sometimes it can be a taboo topic in a family environment, but why are these conversations important from a family violence perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. So we see clients who've been subjected to financial and economic abuse, which is a form of family violence. And it's often taken a really long time for people to realise something is wrong because, as Bridget described, there's a real lack of transparency over the finances that are happening in relationships. So over time, it might have gone from not talking about money to one partner taking control of the banking and the decision making, and then it ends up actually they're controlling the access to money. This is often accompanied by psychological and physical violence, but lack of financial security means that people feel really trapped in those situations. The statistics are really scary, but it's 1 in 2 women experience some form of psychological, financial, sexual, or physical violence at some point in their lifetime. So we are talking about a lot of people. So from my perspective, if we normalise talking about money in our relationships, then we normalise both partners being involved, having a say, participating in decisions. All of these things act as preventative measures against abusive behaviour. If your partner won't sit down and talk with you about money, or you feel scared to bring up money, those are early red flags or warning signs that something is not really right. You should feel safe to be able to change your opinion, have a conversation about becoming a stay-at-home parent, going back to study, and still to have a say about how the household money is spent. And if you don't feel safe to have a say, that's a real problem. And those are only red flags that you're going to pick up by having the conversations or trying to have the conversations. Research shows us that women are capable, but they lack confidence in their ability to make financial decisions. They don't back themselves. But even if you lack confidence, you should still feel safe to ask questions, however silly they may feel to you, of your partner. And as Bridget said, it's even more important for women. Women have lower financial well-being than men. They're worse off after divorce. They're more likely to be the sole caregiver of children after separation, and that limits their employment. They're worse off in retirement. So it's really important that women wrap their heads around this and start to feel like they can have these conversations. And the other thing that's really interesting, I think, is that we know that not all economic harm starts off intentionally. One partner thinking, oh, but I'm looking after you. I'm taking the responsibility for earning the income. I'm paying the bills. I'm letting you stay home to look after the kids. You don't have to worry about anything else. But if you actually had a conversation about that, it might be that actually someone only wanted to stay home with the kids for a short while and they were really keen to get back to work because they wanted to contribute financially. So that's why conversations are so crucial, so that one person's ideas or wants and needs don't over time end up taking priority over the others.
I think that's really interesting about, spotting those sort of red flags. And as you say, it sort of sometimes it starts off fine, but then incrementally, just over time, women lose that control. And obviously the financial burden or impact at the end can be really traumatic. Ayesha, I'd come to you now. What does your research say about people needing to have those healthy financial conversations? Is it more challenging for New Zealanders to bring these conversations up, or is it different across cultures? What's your thoughts on that topic?
Well, it is different across cultures. Broadly, for New Zealanders, we have a couple of things at play. The first is that we have taken our stiff upper lip, British colonial vibes extremely seriously, and a little bit more seriously than other comparable jurisdictions. So if we look at Australia, there are conversations you have about money in Australia that you wouldn't attempt in New Zealand. Similar culture, fairly comparable. We also know that different cultures treat different aspects of these conversations as taboo. And so there's a lot more work that actually needs to be done on that cultural aspect. But broadly for New Zealanders, we do not talk about money. We don't like it. And we don't love talking about money with the closest people. It's not even that we're uncomfortable spreading this around to randoms that we bump into on the street. We're not having these conversations in our households. And that's what Bridget and Nicola are talking about for sure. The other thing, and I think something that might resonate with a lot of people on this call and this webinar, is that we actually are really sort of passing this on to our kids, and I think in a way that we don't mean to. So if we're not talking about money with each other and they don't see the grown-ups and the adults in their household discussing money, and this is everything from operational, like everyday budget, the food bill, the petrol bill, inflation, cost of living at the moment, all that operational stuff, along with the bigger ticket items that Bridget's talking about, what you owe, what you own, the assets, the debts, the big ones and the little ones. If kids don't see us actively engaging in these conversations, they're implicitly learning that this is something we don't talk about. And then if they see those conversations and they're negative, they're filled with blame, there's emotion attached that often has nothing to do with money, what they might be learning is that money causes stress. Money makes daddy angry. Money makes mummy cry. These are negative messages that those kids are going to take into their adulthood, and they're perhaps going to spend a lot of time unworking some of those money stories. I'm at a university. I teach and speak with a lot of young adults, and a lot of time is spent and conversations I'm having with them is, I didn't actually realize But now that I reflect, I've picked this negative money story up from my parents. And I think that that's what we really need to be conscious of as well. It's positive for our financial well-being to speak about money. We should feel safe doing so. We can ask silly questions because often they're not silly. And we can, if we need to, say to our partners, say to the other adults in our life that we have these relationships with, we're doing this for our kids. We need to get good at this so that they can do this easily when they're older, and it's important for them.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, interesting points you make. I mean, we're often told to, talk with our kids about money and, educate them and, set them up well for the future. But, interesting you talk about letting them hear the adults in the household talk about money and discuss, the operational budget, as you say, and make sure that they're involved in a healthy way. So I guess that's a good segue, Latavia, to you, and in terms of are young people talking about money, in your generation, and are they having these healthy conversations? But if they're not, why not? What's your experience?
I think young people are definitely talking about money, but talking about it in terms of the rising cost of living, not being able to afford things. That's talking about money, talking about bills, and talking about how hard it is right now in Aotearoa, especially for a lot of us who have good jobs, we should be financially stable. So I think talking about it, yes. Understanding what to do with it, understanding how to talk to our partners about it and communicating, no. I would say absolutely not. But there are tools out there. And I just wanted to first kind of clarify, as a young person, we're definitely not a homogenous group. And just because we're younger than 39. And I think it's really key to approach our demographic, like any other, with intersectionality in mind and our different experiences that are impacted by gender, sexuality, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, relationship status, religion, ability, as well as our age. And all those things play a really key part into our experiences in New Zealand and our relationships with money. I think when I think back as a financial mentor at a Pacific social service, in terms of life shocks and money, I often had young people coming in, and it wasn't until they were in thousands of dollars of debt, and they'd left high school to help their families. And that wasn't something new that came with the pandemic, but the pandemic kind of highlighted that. And then the current cost of living crisis that we're in now highlights those current inequities. And then there's different young people like myself who are the first in their families to go to university and are navigating kind of social mobility, and who financial literacy is really, really helpful for, because you can actually utilize compound interest and KiwiSave and all of those things, and you kind of have the agency and space and tools to talk to your partner more about money and communicate in healthy ways, because you've had access to education to unpack that and unpack your childhood as well, which a lot of people and a lot of young people don't have as well. So I think it's important to acknowledge the role of privilege in this space, not only for us as women, but for Māori and Pacific women, and especially those interacting with our welfare system as well. Not just the working mums, there are, the mums who are on the benefit as well. They also deserve to be able to raise their kids with enough. So I think that's something really key as well in this conversation that isn't often talked about. But I think to name a few struggles impacting young people when discussing money, I would say, the worrying aspect plays a massive part. Research shows that over 3/4 of young New Zealanders worry about money at least monthly. And we're talking more about money, I think, but it's because of the rising cost of living. So we're all me and my friends, we're all talking about how we can't afford a block of cheese because it's $20 and the gas prices, let alone being able to aspire to save for a house, and also amongst that worrying, you've got to think about the future of the workforce. It's such a massive deal that over 56% of people from ages 18 to 39 in Aotearoa are thinking about leaving the country because of the state that we're in, and because of how high costs are. And it's really important to also highlight the taboo among, and that's relevant to all women, but especially when you're young and those power dynamics of age come in. And if you don't even know or have never seen, like Ayesha touched on, your parents communicating, when you're a young person, how you're supposed to communicate with your first boyfriend or your first partner, and also thinking of it from an intersectional lens, often a lot of the tools that are out there are kind of heteronormative. So how are our queer whānau being included in these conversations around money and healthy relationships when they are often focused towards women? So I think those are all things that are like pretty relevant, and a lot of young people have a lot of access to, I think, discourse around capitalism and anti-capitalism. So I think that adds to kind of the taboo around money being crass and being awkward to talk about. And like the last thing people want to be called, well, especially amongst my community, is being stingy when you're being raised to be a servant leader. So I think having the tools and financial literacy is so important, but it's difficult to talk about money when you're wondering how you're going to keep the lights on. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. And yeah, I think I'll add more later on.
Thanks, Latavia. Look, absolutely. I think sometimes we're guilty of being quite one-dimensional with the messages that we're sending, and, we really need to reach out and talk and address the different groups and young people, old people, etc. So, Nicola, back to you. Actually, no, sorry. I've lost my place. Bridget, so what do you think would change if people were having those healthy financial conversations early on? Could it really make a difference to prevent those sort of messy separations and divorces?
Well, for a start, if you're able to have healthy financial conversations, it's going to stop so many people separating, because money is the number one issue that couples fight about. And money fights leading to divorce is only second behind infidelity. So if it's a huge area, and people have really got to get it right. So what we do in terms of our business, we have a document that's 50 plus questions, and we say to couples, a really good idea is actually to sit down, particularly if you've decided that the relationship that you're in is going to be permanent. What does our life look like moving forward? So what do you like with finances? Are you a spender? Are you a saver? What does that look like for you? So, and the other thing is to actually have a working date every week or every month. What are the issues that we need to work through in our relationship? And I even say to couples, have a conversation when you're in a happy space about, God forbid if you have to end up separating, but what would it look like if we did separate? How is it going to affect the children? Will we be 50-50 custody? What would it look like in terms of our financial separation, our relationship property? And that's a really good way to start. So be serious, but don't be too serious. Have the working date, celebrate the financial wins that you get from the milestones that you meet. Ask for help. So have a third party, whether it's a divorce coach or a financial planner, a financial coach, assist you through it. Because I liken it, the analogy is a car. When your car breaks down, you go to a mechanic. So if you're having issues in terms of what those relationships, your conversations are in terms of money, get someone involved who is an expert in that, and don't keep secrets between each other. And that's coming back to both of you knowing that no one is hiding assets and no one's going to be mistrustful of each other, because you are both got the same plan, you're on the same path, and you know what your assets and liabilities are. If you are having issues, the first one that needs to be discussed, obviously, is debt. That should be your first conversation. Do you have a credit card? Are there any debts that you're bringing into this relationship? For example, a student loan. Have we got differences in terms of what we earn? So how is that going to play out moving forward? Is one of us going to stay at home for a certain amount of time? How does that look? Savings versus spending. So coming back to what I alluded to before, generally in a relationship, there's always somebody who's a spender and someone a saver. So what's the compromise? Should we put aside $150 a week and, we can use that, each of us, however we like, for entertainment or for our own purposes. And financial goals. What are the financial goals that we have? Do we want to have kids first, or do we want to buy a house? Do we want to travel? What does that look like? And that's giving each of you are absolutely empowered in terms of your finances. You've got financial freedom because both of you know absolutely what's happening. And I say to everyone, whether you're single, whether you're thinking about getting married, you are married, thinking about divorcing, are divorced, you have to know what you own and owe.
Yeah. Thanks, Bridget. And I think, it's sometimes at the start of a relationship, nobody thinks they want to talk about, the what if and what if this doesn't last. But it's so crucial and so important, isn't it? And I think it's not just as you say, a sort of a one-off conversation, is it? It's an ongoing, regular check-ins with your partner as you go through. So thank you. Latavia, back to you. How do we get those young people to talk about money early on so that, when they're, thinking about having children or, those long-term goals, moving into retirement or divorce, so that they feel more confident and prepared for some of these challenges?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in the chat have kind of touched on it, but I think, financial literacy in schools, we've all been talking about it, and I think people who have been in this space for a lot longer than I have been talking about how important it is and why it should be in the curriculum. And there are some amazing things out there, and I've seen people listing them: Sorted, Banker, and all these awesome places that you can outsource to come into your schools. But unless it's compulsory and unless it's a part of the New Zealand curriculum, then we're unfortunately not going to engage as much as we could, to be honest. So I think it could be about looking at what we can do as a collective to look at advocating systemically and advocating for it to be involved in the curriculum, because we've seen that through advocacy such as with the New Zealand history to be taught in schools, that it can happen, that we can create change with the curriculum. But there's heaps of amazing stuff already out there, and financial literacy is a key aspect in schools. And unfortunately, a lot of those organisations aren't reaching into our lower decile schools. I presented a financial literacy course in a few Decile 1 schools in South Auckland, and I asked Year 13s who were about to leave school, about 71 of them, who had an FPOS card or a bank account, and only 3 of them were able to put their hands up. So we're failing a lot of our young people, and although we've got these different apps and these different things, nothing beats in-person teaching, and nothing beats face-to-face and connection and interaction. So I think it's about saying what we can do as a collective, together and collaborating to see what we can do to reach young people where they are. And I guess that's what it's about, right? Financial literacy in schools reaches them where they already are in the classroom, but teachers are at capacity trying to fit so many things in as well. So that's also a challenge that comes in. And when I think about collaboration, I think that's another key thing. What services for young people are doing amazing work in their communities already. I think when it comes to young people, it's important for us as organisations and people in these spaces to recognise that you can't just go in and teach one seminar and expect young people to change their entire understanding of money and know their money personality and their habits. So it's about moving at we can only move at the speed of trust. So if we collaborate with organisations that are trusted in their communities, we can make some really important moves. There's places like Sisters United, Rainbow Youth, Village Collective, Strive, Do Good, Feel Good, 275 Collective, these grassroots community activism kind of spaces and that connect young people who may be underserved in our communities. And also when we're consulting with young people with our different programs and different resources that we want to provide, it's important to think about how as we as organisations or as people are being good te tiriti partners. Looking at how does our organisation partner or support groups that are doing the work and that may be trusted, because sometimes you've got to think, should I be doing the work, or could I be adding to it as a mentor, or could I be adding to it financially or with advice, or by giving this organisation some opportunities and spaces that I might take or funding that I might take as an org in the finance space as well. And what do our consultations look like? Are they consistent? Are they sustainable? Do we acknowledge different experiences with koha, or are we using free labour of young people? So I think it's important to ensure that our spaces are safe when engaging with young people and actually asking our rangatahi what's missing for them, like what are they learning in their schools. But I think also we talk a lot about love languages and attachment styles when it comes to relationship. So if we push like money personalities and relationships in those same spaces, it'd be really interesting to see how we can normalize conversations around rangatahi as well. But I think there's nothing beats community and connection when connecting to our rangatahi and their very diverse experiences.
Thanks, Latavia, and some great suggestions there about, different organisations doing some great work in that space. And I have seen, a number of workplaces as well with financial education and wellbeing programs. So I think it's, it's how do we reach and what are those various resources and tools available. And I guess, Nicola, that's a good segue. And I'm wondering if you could tell us about the work that you've been doing to encourage and support people to have the healthy financial relationships.
Yeah, sure. So we wanted to support people and encourage them to have conversations by giving them some tools. So as Latavia said, people are often starting from a place of real hardship and stress. So rather than just saying, off you go, you should talk to your partner more, actually helping people to identify and work through some of the reasons why these conversations can be so difficult, and give people practical ways to start conversations, frame problems, respond in ways that are constructive, so you have a better chance of having a constructive and healthy conversation from the outset. So my team's been working with Ayesha at AUT to create a toolkit. It's got two distinct areas. One is preparing yourself for the things that you need to know before you start a conversation, why you feel the way you do, why you might respond the way you do when something tricky is brought up. And the second part is ways that you can approach and progress the conversation. And there's 16 different topics designed for all different stages of a relationship or even before a relationship. You can start from the beginning. There's also different entry points. If you just want to jump into an area that interests you, go back to it. You can save your progress and see what you've seen. It aims to help people unpack their own perspective and feel confident about starting the conversation, no matter how awkward or scary it is. And also we hope that it might be a talking point of its own. So, oh, hey, you know how last time we talked about our debt, we ended up fighting? Did you know that there's this new toolkit? And would you look at it with me? And we'll see if we can actually talk about these issues that we're having. And while our specific perspective is romantic relationships, because we are working in that space of intimate partner violence, we've had feedback that this is going to be useful for lots of situations. There are people who have said, I need to be able to talk to my parents about money because they don't understand my perspective, and talk to my kids. And we're also really keen to see people talking, because then have more conversations about what is normal, healthy, and appropriate. We don't know what we don't know. And like Ayesha said, if your parents' financial relationship wasn't that great, it's often hard to imagine what an alternative might look like. So the more we talk, the better our overall financial confidence and well-being. And so I'm really hoping that people will jump into the toolkit and have a look for themselves, jump in with a partner, pour a glass of wine and say, hey, let's have a night where we look at this stuff. And we've also, people have said to us, hey, we work with, in the counselling space, we work with people who want to stay together, who don't actually want to separate after violence or after whatever. And we feel like this would be a great tool to be able to sort of progress them from the one-on-one conversations that we're having in the counselling space and saying, hey, you guys, introducing them to it and say, when you get stuck, maybe pop onto this page and have a read of this. So that's what it's designed to do.
Fabulous. Thanks, Nicola. And it's great to have such practical resources just to, kick off that conversation. And you'll see in the chat that there is a link there to the toolkit. So I encourage people to go check it out. It's full of some wonderful tips on just the conversation and real practical suggestions. So, Ayesha, you've been involved in obviously the toolkit. So how did the research that you do influence the toolkit, and I guess as well, what did you find with the when you focus grouped it as well?
Yeah, so firstly, just thrilled that it's up and now everyone can go and look at it and love it or hate it, but tell us all about your experiences. Absolutely. But so it very much was Nicola and I working together in intimate partner violence and money as a weapon, and very much looking at that space of conflict with money. And there is a gap. So everyone's talking about financial capability and financial literacy for, in schools, and I can speak to that if there's time as well. I've just done some new work in that area, literally hot off the press today. But the biggest thing was there's a big gap. So we're very good at providing financial capability and financial literacy tools for individuals. But we know that we then don't talk about money, and we know that we're unlikely to have learned how to talk about money and how to have these conversations from the adults in our life and the people who have raised us. So how do we then go from being two potentially financially capable individuals? How do we become a financially capable relationship? Now, this can be couples, romantic partners, as Nicola said. It can be children talking to parents, parents talking to kids, flatmates talking to flatmates. That's a fairly intimate financial relationship that can go pretty pear-shaped pretty quickly if not everyone's on the same page, particularly with cost of living going up and up and up. So what people found most useful when we focus grouped the toolkit was that it was a place that they can go. So you're not necessarily going to know the problems that you're going to have or what you need to know going in. But what was really, what came back to us when we did speak to people in focus groups, and we had various ages, stages, different types of relationships, with the exception of our rainbow community, who, as Latavia said, there are certain groups who I do not feel as, a heterosexual woman that I'm necessarily the right person to be talking and doing that work. So fully will support anyone doing work in that space. Absolutely. We need a whole bucket of work done for other groups and other relationships. But what we got told, and I'm going to actually reference my other screen and read a quote for you, and this is specifically in reference to the examples of conversations that are available on the toolkit. And what this participant said was, it's the way to facilitate the conversations. The initial example is the way that I've been communicating with my wife. Then there's the second example to adjust what you're saying in the conversation so it can flow in a more effective way. I'm going to adjust what I'm saying to those second examples. Another focus group participant said, I can bring this up on my phone during the conversation and have it there. So as I'm having the conversation, I can go along with what Nicola was saying. Hang on, I think we need to just maybe take a step back and here, look at this thing that I've been really interested in. And do you think that we can do this better? Maybe we need to shelve it for this moment and come back to it and make a date, like what Bridgette said. I mean, I just think it's so cool having this available for people. Bearing in mind our focus group participants, we did give them a couple of hours to play with this content, and not everyone is going to have that time available to them. So very much just dip in wherever you like, wherever you need to. If you need to do the pre-work, do the pre-work. I've had feedback from students that I've shown the toolkit to, young adults who said, actually, I'm going to work on my financial relationship with myself and how I talk to myself about money. And, you know, if that's your starting point, then I think that's fantastic. You know, and yeah, let's just do it in whatever way, shape or form. It's all going to be helpful and it's all going to push us forward and hopefully normalize talking about money, because it's fun. It's not scary. Sometimes it's a little bit harrowing, particularly with petrol prices the way they are. But we don't know what we don't know. And there's power in knowing what you owe and what you own. So I'm going to use that, Bridgette, all the time now. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. And I think, you know, as you say, it's there is that financial capability sort of within us, and then, but to bring that together into that sort of partnership discussion. And I guess it takes us to be maybe a little bit vulnerable, to be open, to be honest. But I love the toolkit, and I love the fact that, you know, you can, depending on the area of interest, that you can sort of delve into certain different areas that are important to you. So, look, I'm keeping track of time, and we're doing really well. But I guess I'm just going to throw it open. And really, is there any other points that any of you as panellists want to make about, you know, what we can do to encourage those conversations with our partners, with our parents, with our kids? You know, is there any other points that you'd like to make maybe before we move into some of the questions?
We've actually, sorry.
Sorry, Nicola, would you like to?
No, that's okay. I just have this special thing that comes really from a family violence lens, that we moved from having physical violence behind closed doors and that's their business and you don't interfere, to now it's not okay. And I'd like us to think about that from a money perspective. So when someone says, oh, you know, I let him have $50 a week, pocket money, that's all he's allowed, challenging that. Oh, and how is he about that? Is he okay with that? Doing that, it's not okay to tell someone, and just a little bit of challenge in that space. That's my that's my wish.
Thanks, Nicola. And that it's not okay message is, you know, is really appropriate here, isn't it? Bridgette, sorry, I cut you off there.
No problem. Coming back to what I'm finding in my practice, you know, the 75 to 80% of women having no idea about their finance. So I thought there's got to be a solution to it. So we've actually developed a financial capability program, Understanding Your Money, in line with a partnership with Cambridge Partners. And then that really gives people the opportunity, whether you're actually, it's not actually just for divorced and separated people, it's for everybody, as I talked about before. We all need to know. And that takes them through from budgeting right through to learning how to invest. It's a mixture of online, and face to face, and that's a really, one of many solutions that that people need to have to help them, understand money. And absolutely, learning about money in school was not an option for me many years ago, and certainly I think that it needs to absolutely be mandatory in all schools moving forward. So, it becomes second nature, learning about how to manage money rather than being blissfully ignorant in terms of how you manage that moving forward through the different stages, life stages.
Thanks, Bridget. And I think I agree wholeheartedly about the, within schools. And one of the best lessons I gave my daughter was to give her a bank account. And she soon realised that it wasn't this bottomless pit, and what she spent, she had to top up. So, that was an interesting lesson for her. Any other comments before we go to the questions? No? Okie doke. So, look, I think we've got some great questions here. One of the first is from Marie. As a financial services provider who wants to support women in this space, what can we do? Anyone like to make a comment there?
I think reassuring women. So the research is very clear that women do know what they're doing and they have real strengths with money. And so reassuring people that they do have something to offer, and just because they've been told, maybe they've been told that they're no good with money, or maybe they have a perception, that we challenge some of those myths and say, actually, that's not the case. Women are good at this.
Great, thank you, Nicola. And a comment from Troy, really, which we should celebrate. Money personality differences don't need to equal incompatibility. As a bloke with a different money personality to my partner, I genuinely like to hear more from other women about how they want to be talked with and listened to. I'm always afraid of doing it wrong. Great points there on adding the kid focus. So thank you, Troy. I think you're right. We, as mentioned by some of the panellists, generally we do, there's a spender, a saver, there's different money personalities. And I think the panellists would probably say it's just about having the conversation.
Yeah, and I might follow up for Troy. I have a very healthy financial relationship with my husband, but I can tell you that as our relationship has kind of changed over time, so too has our ability to discuss financial stuff. So a lot of it early on was filled with conflict. My husband is a saver and was not a spender at all. I have a different philosophy around money, a little bit more free and easy, which is hilarious given the personal finance, academic hat. But the way that we dealt with that was not always constructive. And if I actually look at different points in our relationship, and I think this is what Nicola really summed up quite beautifully at the beginning, was that at times we were nasty to each other. We were not very nice to each other. And at times, the way that we behaved, I would now, as an economic harm researcher, classify those behaviours as abusive. And what we need to realise is that it's not going to be all rosy all the time. You can both use all of these tools and resources, and you'll maybe still fight about money. The point is that coming back afterward and being able to rewind, apologise if that's necessary, make sure that next time you're doing better, but you actually communicate that with your partner. Because what I think is really, really key here is if we leave something unspoken, You don't know what the other person's thinking. They can't read your mind. There were times when my husband had no idea that him just doing what he wanted to do and managing things in the way that he thought was best for us and our family and our financial well-being was slowly chipping away at my confidence. And this is someone with a PhD. So you never know how someone is feeling and what, even in the closest of relationships, what that person might be going through. And what I really love is it's about where we're at. Like Latavia said, you know, all these conversations, if you go in with respect and love for the other person, whatever that looks like, whoever that is, then you're going to end up in a better place than if you just go in prepared to butt heads. And if you do butt heads, that's sweet. You're going to do better next time because you have that love and respect to start with.
Thanks, Ayesha, for sharing that. And agree, sometimes it can, you know, in terms of depending on how the conversation goes and some of the behaviours you might be seeing, that, you know, there could be areas of harm in there. So, you know, really important to address those. One of the questions, do you think it would be good to have money discussed in schools as part of the school curriculum? Ayesha, I think you've also said that you wanted to speak to that. Obviously, we've touched on that topic. Do you have some more to add there, Ayesha?
Just really quickly, it's not as simple as teaching money in schools. And I think Latavia really hit the nail on the head with, we tend to perhaps expect this to be on the curriculum. And yes, it is super important, but it's not clear cut. And what I don't want is that the message goes out that mandatory financial education at primary school and at high school absolves the rest of society of responsibility, because there's plenty of stuff that's taught in school and rightly needs to be in school. Money management, building wealth and financial well-being is a whole of society effort. What we know and what preliminary research, and I say preliminary because literally analysing data right now on young adults, who Latavia will be interested to know, I've classified up to the age of 34, not 39. So I'm no longer a young adult. I was sad about that. But what we know is that it's not clear-cut. And you don't actually necessarily need to have high financial literacy, so that's high knowledge. You don't necessarily need to know what you're doing is correct to be financially capable. So if you hear jargon that you don't actually know the meaning of, that doesn't necessarily automatically mean you're doing the wrong thing. And the jury is not quite out, like is a little bit still out on whether high school is the right time, because we know that post-high school, when young people are becoming more financially independent, they need to know the knowledge then. It's not necessarily relevant for a 14-year-old whose parents are paying the bills to know about the bills. We can prep them, but they're not necessarily going to get that hands-on experience that we know is important. Latavia made a really good point about taking financial education to the right places, being respectful of the fact that not everyone has a bank account, that not everyone has the access to financial experience. So how can we build financial experience in? It's more than just book smarts. It is about making sure that we're targeting financial education in the right spots. Post-high school and workplaces are key, I think, and that's because it's relevant knowledge. But that's my 2 cents. So yes, financial education, but it's not that simple.
Agreed. Latavia, you're nodding your head. I think you're agreeing with all of that, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Thank you, Dr. Ayesha, for that. Yeah, 100%, because I think so often we put it onto schools and on teachers who are underpaid, but that's another conversation, to be able to provide and educate our young people and our kids. But I think in regards to just one thing, I can see the time and I can see Yvonne looking at me, but just in terms of our relationships, often I was referred a lot of couples, and I'm only 23, 24. I was referred a lot of couples because of their money problems being the root of a lot of other issues and a lot of stress. And often we started off with not playing the blame game. Like, it's important to understand it's us as a couple versus the problem, whatever that looks like. So much easier said than done, but it's so great that there's tools like this Healthy Relationship Toolkit that are starting to delve into that space, and hopefully even more opportunities and tools come from this and resources.
Thanks, Latavia. And yes, you are right. I am looking at the clock, and look, it's been a wonderful session, and I really want to thank all the panellists and the audience for their time today. I'm sure you'd all agree that having those healthy, open discussions with our partners is necessary to ensure that good financial well-being. Check out the toolkit, check out the websites that you all have. There's some great resources available. I hope that our audience found the session as engaging as I did, and I'll be booking in a money date with my husband for a discussion, and maybe with that glass of wine. And look, if any of you need support in this area, I would encourage you to check out Good Shepherd's website for the toolkit, our own Craig's website for our Women's Wealth Program, YWCA for younger people, and of course EqualExes for that separation and divorce support. Any of our questions that we weren't able to answer today can be directed to FSC. You can email events@fsc.org.nz. Also, keep an eye out on the events that are linked to the It Starts With Action campaign, and we'll also send out some resources to everyone who registered for the webinar in the next week or so stay tuned in your email inboxes. We've got 2 further It Starts With Action events coming up. There is the Gender Retirement Gap, 12 p.m. on Thursday, the 7th of July at Westpac in Auckland, and also the It Starts With Action Summit on the 28th of July at the Park Hyatt in Auckland. So thank you all again for your time today. Thank you to our panellists. Ngā mihi, have a great afternoon, and thank you for coming along.